Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a super fascinating 2026 study from Kennesaw State University. They investigated a really high-stakes digital mystery. How exactly do machines lie compared to humans? Now, this research tackles one of the absolute most pressing issues of our time, right? The massive spread of misinformation. But instead of just looking at how fake news spreads, these researchers asked a much deeper, more structural question about the actual fabric of the lies themselves. Because, the warning, right? We're constantly hearing that large language models are going to just flood the internet with perfectly crafted, totally undetectable lies. The big fear is that these modern generative systems, which, let's face it, can produce incredibly fluent text at a massive scale, are going to completely overwhelm our ability to tell fact from fiction. Well, today, we're going to actually look at the data to bust this modern myth. Are these machines really the ultimate deceivers, or are we maybe giving them a bit too much credit? So, to figure that out, let's take a look at our two main suspects, humans versus AI. To solve this mystery, the researchers basically set up a highly controlled investigation, separating the fake news by who or what wrote it. On one side, you've got the human con artist. Human-written fake news is, by its very nature, crafted with the explicit intent to persuade or mislead you. It aggressively leverages emotional triggers, things like fear, anger, or outrage, just to capture your attention and drive engagement. Now, on the other side, we have the probabilistic AI machine. Unlike us, AI doesn't feel outrage, right? It generates fake news through probabilistic language modeling, and that naturally results in a much more neutral tone, smoother sentence structures, and a really distinct linguistic consistency.
And that brings us to the ultimate detection test.
Think of this like a digital police lineup. The researchers used machine learning models acting as detectives, looking for a statistical tell. The methodology here is actually brilliantly straightforward. First, they collected three specific datasets: verified real news, curated human-written fake news, and AI-generated fake news produced under highly controlled conditions. Next, they built an identical feature pipeline to measure things like lexical diversity, structural readability, and emotional characteristics. Finally, they rigorously tested both suspects against the real news using the exact same machine learning models. We're talking logistic regression, random forests, neural networks. By keeping the testing pipeline completely identical, they could perfectly isolate the true source of the deception.
Okay, ready for a surprising plot twist? Because the results, well, they speak for themselves. Let's dive into this data. Looking at this model comparison from the study, you can see the AUC scores. Now think of AUC as basically a grade of how well our digital detective separates real from fake. On the left, we're distinguishing real news from human fake news. On the right, real news versus AI fake news. Notice how the scores are systematically lower for catching human lies. They range from about 0.88 to 0.95. Not bad. But look at the right column. The scores are shockingly high for identifying AI, with almost every single model hitting above a 0.99. And this performance gap isn't just a fluke of one specific algorithm either. It shows up across linear, nonlinear, and ensemble-based methods.
Actually, check this out. The ensemble model, which basically aggregates information across all the different models to create one super detective, caught the AI-generated fake news with a near-perfect score of 0.996. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that AI is currently terrible at hiding its lies from other algorithms. The distributions of real news and AI-generated fake news are just incredibly easy for a computer to separate.
And this visual brilliantly illustrates that plot twist. Here, we're looking at the ROC curves for the random forest classifier. That red line represents the model's ability to detect AI fake news. And notice how it lies uniformly above the teal line, which is the human fake news. This visual dominance shows you just how much easier it is to separate AI fake news from real news across basically all possible classification thresholds. For any given false positive rate, catching the machine is just vastly superior.
So that begs the question, how exactly do machines lie differently?
Why does the AI get caught almost 100% of the time? If these large language models are so incredibly fluent, why do they leave such a glaring statistical footprint? Well, the digital detectives found their ultimate poker tell in structural readability. This chart shows the density of the Coleman-Liao index, which is just a fancy way to measure linguistic complexity based on character-level stats. On the left, notice how the red curve of human fake news heavily overlaps with the teal curve of real news. Humans naturally mimic the structural characteristics of legitimate journalism. But on the right, the AI fake news stands totally alone in its uniformity. It completely lacks the natural variability, the burstingness, of real human writing. And that reduced overlap is exactly what leads to it getting caught red-handed.
And if we look at this feature heat map, you'll see another huge giveaway, the AI's distinct lack of emotional manipulation. This graphic displays the difference in mean feature values between fake and real news. Basically, the darker the color, the bigger the deviation from real news. Look at the left column for AI. Features like trust, positive sentiment, and anticipation are just totally stripped away. They are heavily reduced compared to real news. The AI simply provides a much less emotionally rich linguistic profile. But in contrast, the human column on the right shows much smaller deviations. Human lies are just much closer to the emotional cadence of actual journalism.
Which brings us nicely to the human art of deception. Because honestly, this data builds a pretty strong case for human ingenuity, albeit for a pretty dark purpose. Despite literally all the hype around artificial intelligence right now, humans are actually still the master deceivers. Because human con artists strategically manipulate contextual cues and inject chaotic emotional triggers, their lies very closely mimic legitimate journalism. They understand the messy heterogeneity of real news. They know exactly how to leverage fear, anger, and outrage to slip right past the models. The study strongly emphasizes that purely text-based detection approaches face some massive inherent limitations when they try to distinguish high-quality human-generated misinformation from legitimate content. We're just too good at adapting our style to fool the reader.
But of course, we have to talk about the evolving AI threat.
We absolutely cannot just rest easy knowing today's generative AI is a bad liar. The landscape of tech is incredibly dynamic, and what's true for the models today is definitely not going to hold true tomorrow. The researchers explicitly warn that as large language models evolve, they are very likely to lose these detectable statistical signatures. The rapid improvements in realism and text diversity that we're already seeing will rapidly erode our current defensive capabilities. The fact that AI currently writes with a detectable structural regularity and emotional flatness, yeah, that's a temporary advantage for our detection systems, not a permanent victory.
Which leaves us with a pretty sobering final thought. Right now, today, the machines are easy to catch because they lie like machines. But what happens to our digital world when they learn to adapt, to truly harness emotion, and to start lying exactly like us? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, guys. Keep questioning what you read, and I'll see you next time.